The January 6th committee's sixth hearing had a star witness, Cassidy Hutchinson. She's a top aide to former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. She was another Republican on the list of witnesses we've seen so far, and she was very well known on Capitol Hill. She previously worked for the second highest Republican in the House, Representative Steve Scalise, and also for Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz. Her testimony was all about tying former President Trump and his chief of staff directly to a plot to overturn the U.S. government. The attack on the Capitol was not a surprise to people in the White House. There were people there that planned it. Listen to this.
On January 2nd, 4 days before the attack on our Capitol, President Trump's lead lawyer, Mr. Giuliani, was meeting with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and others. Ms. Hutchinson, do you remember Mr. Giuliani meeting with Mr. Meadows on January 2nd, 2021?
I do. He met with Mr. Meadows in the evening of January 2nd, 2021.
And we understand that you walked Mr. Giuliani out of the White House that night, and he talked to you about January 6th. What do you remember him saying?
As Mr. Giuliani and I were walking to his vehicles that evening, he looked at me and said something to the effect of, "Cass, are you excited for the 6th? It's going to be a great day." I remember looking at him saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th? He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful. He's going to be with the members. He's going to be with the senators. Talk to the chief about it. Talk to the chief about it. He knows about it."
And did you go back then up to the West Wing and tell Mr. Meadows about your conversation with Mr. Giuliani?
I did. After Mr. Giuliani had left the campus that evening, I went back up to our office and I found Mr. Meadows in his office on the couch. He was scrolling through his phone. I remember leaning against the doorway and saying, "I just had an interesting conversation with Rudy, Mark. Sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol." He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real bad on January 6th.
The National Security Division warned about possible violence on January 6th, 2021.
We're going to turn to certain information that was available before January 4th and what the Trump administration and the president knew about the potential for violence before January 6th. On the screen, you will see an email received by Acting Deputy Attorney General Donahue on January 4th from the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. Mr. Donahue testified in our hearings last week. The email identifies apparent planning by those coming to Washington on January 6th to, quote, occupy federal buildings and discussions of, quote, invading the Capitol building. Here's what Mr. Donahue said to us.
And we knew that if you have tens of thousands of very upset people showing up in Washington, D.C., that there was potential for violence.
The U.S. Secret Service was looking at similar information and watching the planned demonstrations. In fact, their intelligence division sent several emails to White House personnel like Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato and the head of the President's Protective Detail, Robert Engel, including certain materials listing events like those on the screen. The White House continued to receive updates about planned demonstrations, including information regarding the Proud Boys organizing and planning to attend events on January 6th. Although Ms. Hutchinson has no detailed knowledge of any planning involving the Proud Boys for January 6th, she did note this.
I recall hearing the word Oath Keeper and hearing the word Proud Boys closer to the planning of the January 6th rally when Mr. Giuliani would be around.
Hutchinson testified that on January 5th, Trump told his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, to get in contact with Roger Stone and Michael Flynn, two of Trump's advisors. Both men had been convicted of crimes and got presidential pardons. According to Cassidy Hutchinson, Mark Meadows, her boss, did what Trump asked him. We know that Roger Stone was in Washington, D.C. because there are multiple photos of him there with members of the Oath Keepers who were acting as his bodyguards. That evening, Mark Meadows was considering joining Rudy Giuliani, Trump's lawyer, and several others at the Willard Hotel in DC. They had set up a room that they called the War Room, and Meadows didn't end up going, but called instead. Let's move to the next day, January 6th, 2021. Around 8 a.m., according to Cassidy Hutchinson, there were intelligence reports coming in saying that people near the ellipse where Trump was going to give a speech were wearing body armor and had weapons. We're talking about AR-15s, shotguns, and more. She also said that at 10 a.m. she, Mark Meadows, and Tony Ornato, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, talked about the weapons, but Mark Meadows brushed it off. He only asked if Trump knew about it, and they said that they had told him. During the hearing and during Cassidy Hutchinson's live and videotaped testimony, there's a lot of talk about mags, magnetometers. These are machines that screen people for weapons. So listen to this part.
Ms. Hutchinson, we're going to show now an exchange of texts between you and Deputy Chief of Staff Ornato. And these text messages were exchanged while you were at the ellipse. In one text, you write, "But the crowd looks good from this vantage point as long as we get the shot. He was effing furious." And the text messages also stress that President Trump kept mentioning the OTR, an off-the-record movement. We're going to come back and ask you about that in a minute. But could you tell us, first of all, who it is in the text who was furious?
The he in that text that I was referring to was the president.
And why was he furious, Ms. Hutchinson?
He was furious because he wanted the arena that we had on the ellipse to be maxed out at capacity for all attendees. The advance team had relayed to him that the mags were free-flowing. Everybody who wanted to come in had already come in, but he still was angry about the extra space and wanted more people to come in.
And did you go to the rally in the presidential motorcade?
I was there, yes, in the motorcade.
And were you backstage with the president and other members of his staff and family?
I was.
And you told us, Ms. Hutchinson, about particular comments that you heard while you were in the tent area.
When we were in the offstage announce area tent behind the stage, he was very concerned about the shot, meaning the photograph that we would get, because the rally space wasn't full. One of the reasons, which I've previously stated, was because he wanted it to be full and for people to not feel excluded because they'd come far to watch him at the rally. And he felt the mags were at fault for not letting everybody in. But another leading reason, and likely the primary reason, is because he wanted it full and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons, what the Secret Service deems as weapons and our weapons. But when we were in the offstage announce tent, I was part of a conversation. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Just to be clear, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that the president wanted to take the mags away and said that the armed individuals were not there to hurt him?
That's a fair assessment.
Let that sink in for a second, because there's a lot more. Hutchinson testified that Trump was determined to go to the Capitol with the crowd. But White House counsel Pat Cipollone was freaking out about this. Cipollone told Hutchinson that if Trump did that, the White House could be charged with every crime imaginable because it would look like Trump was inciting a riot. At the same time, Trump was pissed because Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, hadn't been able to convince the Secret Service to make that happen. Listen to her recount what happened after the president got into his SUV and found out that he wasn't going to the Capitol. She refers to the SUV as the Beast.
Tony proceeded to tell me that when the president got in the Beast, he was under the impression from Mr. Meadows that the off-the-record movement to the Capitol was still possible and likely to happen, but that Bobby had more information. So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol, and when Bobby had relayed to him, we're not, we don't have the assets to do it, it's not secure, we're going back to the West Wing. The president had very strong, a very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
Then they're all back at the White House. The rioters have breached the Capitol, and some of them are hunting down Vice President Mike Pence. Cassidy Hutchinson describes how she went to Mark Meadows, her boss, to his office a little bit after 2 p.m., worried because of what was going on. She asked him if he was watching the scene on TV while he was looking through his phone, and he said that he was. So then she asked him if he had talked to Trump. Meadows said, yeah, he wants to be alone right now. So Cassidy Hutchinson got frustrated because he didn't seem too worried about the rioters breaching into the Capitol. The White House lawyer, Pat Cipollone, came into Meadows' office wanting to speak to the president. Meadows, again, said that Trump didn't want to do anything. Now, this part of the testimony is about 8 minutes long, so I put the link in the description so you can watch it if you want. White House lawyer Pat Cipollone was very frustrated because things were getting out of control. Cipollone tried to get Trump to talk to the rioters and ask them to stop the attack once they started chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." But Cassidy Hutchinson testified that Meadows told Pat Cipollone, "You heard it, Pat. He thinks Pence deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong."
Let me pause here on this point. As rioters chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," the President of the United States, Donald Trump, said that, quote, "Mike deserves it," and that those rioters were not doing anything wrong. This is a sentiment that he has expressed at other times as well. In an interview with ABC News correspondent Jonathan Karl, President Trump was asked about the supporters chanting "Hang Mike Pence" last year. Instead of condemning them, the former president defended them.
Because it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? Yeah. How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
At 2:24 that day, Trump sent the tweet blaming Pence for letting him down.
One of my staff brought me a printout of a tweet by the president. And the tweet said something to the effect that Mike Pence, the vice president, didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. I read that tweet and made a decision at that moment to resign. That's where I knew that I was leaving that day once I read that tweet.
Ultimately, members of the White House staff, Sarah Matthews, cabinet members Secretary Chao and Secretary DeVos resigned as well. Here is Secretary DeVos's resignation letter. As you can see, in resigning on January 6th, Secretary DeVos said to the president, quote, "There's no mistaking the impact your rhetoric had on the situation, and it is the inflection point for me." Let's also look at Secretary Chao's resignation statement. When Secretary Chao resigned, she spoke of the January 6th attack, and she said, quote, "As I am sure is the case with many of you, this has deeply troubled me in a way I simply cannot set aside."
Secretary DeVos is the former Secretary of Education. Secretary Elaine Chao was the Secretary of Transportation at the time. She's also the wife of then Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. By 3 p.m., there were several White House staffers, members of Congress, even his own daughter, Ivanka Trump, begging Trump to say something and tell his followers to go home. They all knew that Trump could make the violence stop if he wanted to. Finally, at 4:17 p.m., he released a video telling rioters to go home. This is the video he tweeted where he told rioters, "We love you." Here's part of the video he released.
We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Even President-elect Biden had already made a statement at that point. In my summary of the 8th hearing, I'll tell you more specifically about everything that happened during the 187 minutes of Trump's inaction. So make sure you're subscribed if you don't want to miss it. On January 7th, members of Trump's cabinet were considering invoking the 25th Amendment to the Constitution and removing Trump from office. The 25th Amendment creates a process for the transition of power if a president is unfit or unable to serve. It has never been used to remove a president, but this was being discussed by members of Trump's cabinet to strip him from the power of the presidency. Trump's advisors convinced him to make another video. Again, he refused to say that the rioters should be prosecuted and would not say that the election was over. We also learned during this hearing that after all this happened, both Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani asked for presidential pardons. At the end of the hearing, Vice Chair Liz Cheney dropped this little gem.
After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us, and this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice. Let me say one more time, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously.
My next summary will cover how Trump summoned right-wing extremists to DC on January 6, 2021 in another attempt to overturn the 2020 election. I have been putting a ton of work into creating these summaries for you, since I know most people don't have 20 plus hours to catch up on everything that happened, but it's super important. I want as many people to know how close our democracy came to a halt on January 6, 2021. And it is still under attack. So please like this video if these summaries have been helpful, and stay tuned to this channel because there will be more. I promise. Nos vemos pronto. Un abrazo.